The sun scorched the Dornish sands like fire upon steel, but Robb Stark welcomed the burn. It reminded him he was still alive, still breathing, still bleeding. Every time the dry wind licked the scabs along his ribs and back, he remembered the betrayal at the Twins, the screams of his men, the blood soaking his mother's dress, her final scream before silence swallowed her. They were all dead, his army, his bannermen, his mother, even Grey Wind, but not him. By chance or curse, he had survived. Carried out half-conscious under the piles of corpses, hidden by a faithful squire who died shortly after from a spear wound no one noticed until too late. Robb was supposed to die that night. He had wanted to, but something inside him had refused to let go. A cold, hard thing that whispered, "Live." So they pay for what they've done. Now, months later, Robb Stark walked with a southern caravan, under false names, his direwolf cloak traded for a sun-bleached robe, his sword hidden beneath woven fabrics, and his identity buried beneath layers of lies. The road was long, full of thirst and whispers, but every step brought him closer to Sunspear, the heart of Dorne. Why Dorne? Because they hated the Lannisters almost as much as he did. Because they remembered Elia Martell, Rhaegar's wife, and the children murdered by Tywin Lannister's dogs. Because in Dorne, vengeance wasn't a sin, it was sacred. He kept his hood low when they arrived. Sunspear rose like a golden flame from the desert, its towers twisting toward the sky. The city moved slower than the north, deliberate in its heat, but every glance was sharp, every word veiled. He needed to tread carefully. He wasn't just a man in hiding. He was a wanted king, a ghost come back from the grave. Robb found himself before the great doors of House Martell, led by a merchant who owed him a favor, one of the few he had left in the world. "The prince may listen," the man whispered, "but he doesn't trust strangers, least of all northern ghosts." He was taken through shaded corridors and cool stone halls, past spears and sideways glances, until he stood in a chamber dimly lit by shafts of golden light. Prince Doran Martell sat reclined in his seat, his hands folded, his face unreadable. A man who moved little, but saw everything. Beside him stood a younger man, lean, dangerous, and unmistakably viper-like in his gaze. Oberyn Martell. Robb dropped his hood. The room changed. The air thickened. "You should be dead," Doran said, his voice soft but edged with steel. "Many think I am," Robb replied. Oberyn stepped forward, tilting his head. "Then who stands before us? A ghost, a liar, or a Stark with unfinished business?" Robb met his eyes. "I am Robb Stark of Winterfell, king in the north. I was betrayed by the Freys and the Boltons under Lannister orders. I have nothing left but my name and my war. I come to Dorne for one thing, vengeance." Oberyn smiled, but it was not kind. "And what would a northern king do with Dornish vengeance? You think us tools? Swords to be borrowed for a grudge not ours?" Robb did not flinch. "No, I come not to use Dorne. I come to join it." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut flesh. Even Doran's fingers twitched, just once. "You propose an alliance," the prince murmured. Robb nodded. "One the Lannisters would never expect. The North and Dorne united, two lands that have never knelt easily to southern crowns. Together we could carve a wound so deep, even Cersei's smirk would vanish." Oberyn looked at his brother, then back to Robb. "And what would you offer us, Wolf King? You come with no army, no lands, no crown." "I offer my sword," Robb said, "my loyalty, my blood if need be, and something more." He stepped forward. "Let me marry one of your daughters, or your kin. Let the North bind itself to Dorne in truth, not just strategy." Doran's eyes narrowed, Oberyn's smirk returned. And far above, in a shaded balcony, a girl in orange silk watched him, curious, amused, and not entirely unimpressed. Her name was Nymeria Sand. Whispers travelled faster than ravens in Westeros, and though the world thought Robb Stark long buried, beneath Frey treachery, the faintest rumour of a northern ghost in Sunspear had begun to spread. It hadn't reached the Iron Throne yet, but it stirred restlessly among sellswords, spies, and silent sisters in the shadows. Meanwhile, in the Dornish palace, Robb Stark was being remade. Oberyn Martell took it upon himself to forge the wolf anew, not just as a warrior, but as a player in the cruel dance of southern politics. Morning after morning, Robb sparred with sand snakes in the heat-drenched yards, learning to fight with speed, not brute force. By evening, he was dragged through Dornish court, where words cut deeper than steel. And at night, when all had grown quiet, he sat alone under the stars, writing letters he would never send. One of those nights, Nymeria returned. This time, she brought wine. "You still dream of the north," she said, sitting beside him on the sun-warmed stone. "Of snow, of the old gods, of wolves." Robb didn't look at her. Every night. "And yet," she said, swirling the wine, "you do not leave. You bleed for Dorne. You speak our tongue. You wear our colors. Why?" He stared into the darkness for a moment. "Because vengeance isn't enough if it dies with me. I need to build something. Or I've lost more than just my family. I've lost myself." Nymeria tilted her head. "And what are you building, wolf?" Robb turned to face her. "A war." That same week, a surprise guest arrived in Sunspear, brought in by Dornish scouts who had found her on the edge of the Sea of Dorne, fleeing from bandits who mistook her for a low-born traveler. It was Meera Reed, disheveled, exhausted, but alive, and with her a secret, one that made Robb's blood turn to ice. "Bran," she said the moment she saw him, "your brother lives." Robb staggered, grabbing the edge of a table. "What did you say?" "After the sack of Winterfell, I found him. Jojen and I kept him hidden, far north, beyond the wall. He's changed. There's magic in him now, visions, dreams. He walks through crows and trees. I don't understand it, but I know this. He's important, more than either of us can imagine." Robb sat down hard, the words crashing through his thoughts. Bran was alive, the boy who climbed towers, the brother he couldn't save, the one whose legs never healed. Somehow he had survived and become something else entirely. Meera leaned forward. "He said you'd need him. He saw a red lion devouring the north and a crowned wolf drenched in fire. I don't know what it means, but he begged me to find you." Robb closed his eyes, taking a breath that trembled in his chest. When he opened them again, Nymeria was standing in the doorway. She had heard enough. "What will you do?" she asked. Robb rose slowly. "If the north still breathes, if Bran lives, then I have more than revenge to fight for. I have a future to take back." But Prince Doran didn't share his fire. Not yet. When Robb brought the news to him, the prince's face remained unreadable. "Magic, visions, boys who fly through crows," Doran said softly. "These are tales we tell children under starry skies, not the foundations of war." "It's more than tales," Robb argued. "Bran can see things, know things. He's a weapon none of the Lannisters could predict." "Perhaps," Doran allowed, "but so is patience. And we are not ready." Robb clenched his fists. "They killed my mother, my men, my bannermen. They flayed my allies and placed a Bolton on my father's throne. If not now, when?" "You forget," Doran said, eyes narrowing. "They killed Elia Martell, my sister, her children, her blood, and I waited years for the right strike. I will not rush because your blood burns hotter than mine." Robb turned, seething. Before he could storm away, Oberyn blocked his path. "You want a war?" Oberyn said. "Then fight one from the shadows first. Dorne doesn't shout, Robb. We sting." He smiled coldly. "I'll take you to the stepstones. There's a Dornish fleet hidden there, gathering strength. Sail ships loyal to me, pirates with grudges against the crown, and men who would kill for gold and cause alike." Robb's eyes lit with renewed purpose. "And what of your niece?" Oberyn added. "Nymeria." Robb looked away, the thoughts tangling in his head. "She's watching," Oberyn said, "and she doesn't give her heart to ghosts." As preparations began, a raven flew from Sunspear to the north. Hidden in its wing, a single strip of parchment bearing 6 words in ink as red as blood. "The wolf lives. Fire rises from sand." And in the snows of Winterfell, Sansa Stark read it with trembling hands. The stepstones were a jagged line of broken islands scattered between Dorne and Essos. Once pirate havens, now blood-soaked battlegrounds where old sell-sails and lost lords clashed for coin and chaos. It was here that Robb Stark came to breathe as a warrior again. And it was here that Oberyn Martell began to test just how far the wolf would go to reclaim his howl. They arrived under the cover of dusk aboard a sleek Dornish vessel. No banners, no titles, just wind and whispered names. Oberyn, draped in black and gold, moved like he owned the sea. Robb wore leather armor stained with dust and salt, his hair longer now, beard rough and unshaven. The son of Dorne had changed him, hardened his muscles, darkened his skin, sharpened his stare. But what truly changed was his soul. He was no longer Robb Stark, boy king of Winterfell. He was something else, something darker. The pirates who met them weren't much for ceremony. One called himself Captain Viego, once a Myrish noble, now a merchant of death. His crew had scars instead of manners, and their loyalty went to the highest bidder or the deadliest ally. "You want our blades?" Viego asked, sipping from a wine jug. "Then give us cause." Oberyn simply pointed to Robb. "He's your cause," Viego snorted. "A Northman? We sail south, not north. I've no wish to freeze my cock off in a land of wolves." Robb stepped forward, lifting a rolled map and slamming it onto the wooden table. "This isn't about the North. It's about bleeding the Lannisters from the inside out. I know where they're weakest. Their supply chains, their eastern gold runs, their Blackwater ports." He laid it all out, routes he remembered from captured ravens, movements of trade ships to King's Landing, troop rotations near the Stormlands, but most importantly, the coming unrest in the Riverlands, where the Freys were hated and the small folk had begun to rebel in secret. "You strike where they don't expect. Hit their wealth, their food, their fear," Robb said coldly, "and by the time they realize who's behind it, they'll already be burning." Viego leaned back, chewing on the end of a smoked fish bone. "And what do we get?" Robb looked him dead in the eyes. "A kingdom where the lion doesn't rule, and gold, more than you've ever buried." Viego grinned. "Then let's dance, little wolf." Within a week, raiding parties were sent out under black sails, slaughtering Lannister convoys, torching grain meant for King's Landing, hijacking merchant ships bound for Casterly Rock. And in every burnt cart or dead captain, they left a single token behind, a Dornish sun pinned through a wolf's fang. The message spread like wildfire. The Wolf of Dorne had risen. Meanwhile, in Sunspear, Nymeria watched the tides shift. She heard the whispers, the rumors of a Stark leading Dornish pirates, of gold bleeding from the rock. But what haunted her more was her own heart, why she thought of him every time the wind blew hot against her skin, why his silence since leaving felt heavier than a blade. One evening, she cornered Dorne in the Solar. Her tone was sharp, unguarded. "You're letting Robb fight our war." Dorne didn't lift his gaze from his scrolls. "No. I'm letting him prove he's not a boy who lost a war. I'm letting him earn his fire." Nymeria stepped closer. "And if he dies?" Dorne looked up slowly. "Then he was never meant to lead us." But he didn't die. He thrived. In 1 month, Robb had sunk 7 Lannister ships, destroyed a grain convoy heading for King's Landing, and recruited nearly 300 mercenaries under Dornish banners. And still, no word reached the Iron Throne of his identity. His face, his name, it was myth now, a ghost in the sand and sea. Then came the night it all changed. A raven arrived in Sunspear, sealed in wax blacker than pitch. It bore the sigil of House Bolton. Inside, a single message written in Roose Bolton's cruel, precise hand: "Return to your grave, boy, or your sister dies screaming." Sansa. The wolf in Robb exploded. He stormed from the stepstones that very night, demanding a council at Sunspear by dawn. When he arrived, his face was carved from fury. "We move north," he said. Doran's council erupted. Some laughed, some cursed. But Oberyn stood silent. Nymeria met Robb's eyes across the room, and something passed between them. Something final. Doran raised his hand. "You would risk everything for one girl?" Robb's voice was low. "She's not just a girl. She's a Stark, my sister, and the North remembers." There was silence. Then finally Oberyn smiled. "Then let's give them something to remember." By nightfall, Dornish riders were sent east, ravens west, and plans long buried were being dug out of stone and blood. The Wolf of Dorne was coming home. And he wasn't alone. The ride north was not swift. It was methodical, veiled, and soaked in blood. Robb Stark did not march with banners or horns. His force moved like a shadow slipping through the realm, burning supply depots, assassinating Lannister agents, and leaving behind a trail of unrest that stretched from the Reach to the Vale. The Seven Kingdoms had grown arrogant in the wake of the Red Wedding. They believed the North broken, its wolves hunted to extinction. But now, rumors whispered through taverns and castles alike. A Stark in Dorne, a Martell fleet moving without warning, and something darker rising from the snow. In White Harbor, Lord Wyman Manderley, once forced to kneel before Roose Bolton, received a sealed scroll carried by a one-eyed raven. The seal was broken only by fire, and inside were 2 words: "It's me." He didn't sleep that night. By morning, White Harbor was already preparing for revolt. In Sunspear, Nymeria Sand stood on the high balcony, watching the flames of Robb's war grow taller with each passing day. She had been left behind, not in disgrace, but in purpose. Doran had chosen her to guard the Dornish court, to prepare the next stage, but it didn't matter. Her thoughts were with the wolf. Every raven that returned from the north bore his victories. Bolton scouts slaughtered in the neck, Frey camps set ablaze in the riverlands, and whispers from peasant villages swearing they saw a young man in furs leading the charge. "They say he rides with a red viper at his side," one letter read. "They say he never sleeps, only plans. They say he's come back to take his head from Bolton's walls." And then came the turning point. A Frey garrison at the ruins of Moat Cailin fell, not in battle but from within. After soldiers poisoned during a feast, courtesy of Dornish wine gifted by a traitor they never saw coming. When the Boltons heard, they panicked. At Winterfell, Roose Bolton read the reports with growing unease. The North was supposed to be quiet. His dogs should have been enough to keep it broken. But now the snows were rising. Now the flayed banners were being torn down in the night. Now his own men spoke Robb's name like a curse they couldn't kill. And Sansa. She was more dangerous than he had realized. She played the quiet lady during the day, but he knew the truth. Servants began vanishing. Some guards no longer reported for duty. Letters were being smuggled out by pigeons, by rats, by means he couldn't even trace. He beat her once, in front of everyone, to remind her she was alone, but she only stared at him with eyes colder than any northern wind. "You'll hear the wolves soon," she said, her voice flat, "and they'll be louder than your screams." He locked her in the highest tower after that. 3 nights later, a scream did rise from the walls. But it wasn't Sansa's. It was one of his own captains, flayed and nailed to the gates. Beneath him, scrawled in ash and blood, were 5 words: "The North remembers the king." Rose knew then Robb Stark was not just alive, he was close. Desperate, he summoned reinforcements from the Dreadfort, sent ravens to the twins, begged for Lannister aid. But the Lannisters were busy. Cersei had lost control in the capital, and their gold no longer held the power it once did. And the phrase, they were dying faster than the messages could reach them. Meanwhile, Robb had entered the North. He didn't ride a white horse, and he didn't wear a crown. He wore armor etched with the symbols of both wolf and sun. At his side rode Oberyn Martell, laughing as they carved their way through Bolton sympathizers. And behind them came Northmen and Dornish alike, strange bedfellows brought together by one simple truth. They wanted to watch the lion bleed. At the edge of the Wolfswood, Robb met with Weman Manderly and other lords who had hidden their loyalty. Behind false oaths for too long, they pledged themselves anew, falling to one knee in the snow. "You were our king once," Wyman said. "Let us make it right." Robb's voice was rough but steady. "Then let's take back what's ours." The march to Winterfell began. Inside the castle, Sansa watched the snowfall thicken. She heard the horns in the far distance. Soft at first, like ghosts returning home, but she knew he was here. The wolf had returned, and Winterfell would burn before it bowed to the Boltons again. Winterfell stood under heavy snow, blanketed, in silence, but the storm outside its walls was anything but quiet. From the battlements, Bolton guards watched the tree line nervously. The howling wind masked footsteps, and shadows moved where no man walked. They had heard the tales of ghosts in the trees, of direwolves returned, of a boy with fire in his eyes and vengeance in his veins. Inside the tower, Sansa Stark dressed slowly. No one came to stop her. She had waited too long, bled too much, and whispered in the ears of too many frightened men to be denied her moment. In her palm rested a shard of broken mirror she had sharpened against the stone wall, not for escape, for the end, if it came to that. She would not scream for the Boltons again, but deep down, she didn't expect to need it. She knew her brother, and outside, just beyond the gates of her childhood home, Robb Stark stood wrapped in wolf fur and vengeance. He had left the Dornish armor behind. Tonight, he wore the North again. Beside him, Oberyn Martell rolled his shoulders, twirling his spear. "This place smells like rot," Oberyn muttered. Robb's voice was hard. "That's because it's full of traitors." Behind them, the army was a strange sight. Northern houses like Manderly and Glover, beside sun-darkened Dornish spearmen. Ghosts of 2 different wars, united by fury. Fires burned low, siege ladders prepared in silence. Ravens had flown out all night, to the Vale, to the Wall, to any last soul still loyal to the wolf. It didn't matter who answered now. They were here. "Do we knock?" Oberyn asked with a wicked smile. "No," Robb growled. "We howl." And then it began. The horns blew 3 long, thunderous blasts, echoing across the snowy field and into the heart of Winterfell. Then came the torches, flying over the walls, ladders, grappling hooks, screams, snow soaked in blood. From the battlements, the Bolton men fired arrows wildly, but the North was fighting like it remembered how to win. They climbed fast, they fought dirty, and in the chaos, a small gate on the eastern wall burst open. From inside, Sansa. She had stabbed the guard with the mirror shard, taken his keys, and unlatched the heavy door herself. She ran barefoot through the snow, dress torn, hair wild. Behind her, smoke began to rise from the armory she'd lit ablaze. The castle was eating itself. Robb entered through that very gate moments later. He saw her, frail, pale, but proud, and For a second, everything froze. He dropped his sword. She ran to him. And for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, two Starks embraced in Winterfell's yard again. "I knew you'd come," she whispered. "I was too late once," Robb said. "Not again." But the war wasn't done. Roose Bolton was still alive, and worse, his bastard Ramsay had returned that very night from a hunting raid, and he had brought flayed corpses as trophies. He saw the fires, the torn banners, the gates broken, and he smiled. Robb barely had time to send Sansa into hiding before Ramsay's dogs were unleashed into the courtyard, howling like the devils they were. Men fell. Steel clashed. Oberyn Martell met Ramsay in the middle of the yard, spear against daggers, grace against madness. "You're the one with the bastard smile," Oberyn said, circling him. "And you're the fool who bled for a lost cause." Ramsay spat. They fought viciously. Ramsay was fast, cruel, unpredictable, but Oberyn was precise, practiced, unrelenting. Each clash rang through the snow like thunder, but just as Oberyn struck a blow to Ramsay's shoulder, a Bolton archer loosed an arrow into his thigh. He stumbled. Ramsay surged. Robb saw it happen from across the yard and roared. He crashed into Ramsay with such force it knocked both men into the snow. Swords flew. Blood spilled. They rolled across the courtyard like beasts, scratching, clawing, striking. "You should have stayed dead," Ramsay screamed. "And you should never have worn my father's hall," Robb shouted back. Then, finally, he got the upper hand. Ramsay's dagger missed his throat by inches. Robb grabbed it, twisted his wrist, and drove his own blade straight through Ramsay's heart. No words, no final insult. Just cold, bloody silence. Robb stood over the body, panting, soaked in red and snow. Winterfell was his again. Roose Bolton had vanished, slipped into the darkness with a handful of men. A coward's escape. But it didn't matter. The flayed man had fallen. The wolf had taken back his home, and from the broken walls of Winterfell, a new banner was raised. The dire wolf of House Stark, stitched with the blazing sun of House Martell behind it. A symbol of vengeance, a promise of war still to come, because the Lannisters hadn't paid yet, and Robb Stark was far from finished. In the golden halls of the Red Keep, Queen Cersei Lannister stood at her balcony with wine in hand and rage in her eyes. Below, the capital groaned under the weight of debt, drought, and decay. The people whispered about rebellion again, just like they had during the War of the Five Kings. But this time, their eyes were not on Stannis or Renly. They were looking north. To the boy king, they thought dead. To the Wolf of Dorne. Cersei had laughed when she first heard the rumors. A ghost, a drowned king crawling from a fray pit. It was nonsense, childish superstition. But then came the first real raven. Winterfell is lost. The Bolton line is broken. The Stark boy lives. She had crushed her goblet in her fist. The wine soaked her fingers, but it was the blood in her mouth that tasted like iron. Now she watched her kingdom rot beneath her. Her allies were thinning. Tyrell coffers were gone. House Frey was bleeding men to northern retaliation. And the Lannister name no longer struck fear as it once did. "He has Oberyn Martell's backing," Qyburn said quietly from the shadows of the throne room. "And the Dornish fleet is on the move. It is not a rebellion, it's a campaign." Cersei turned, her eyes wild. "What of the Golden Company?" "Paid but hesitant," he replied. "They were promised glory, not ghosts with northern steel. And they know you are weakened." Her jaw clenched. "Send another raven. Double their offer. If they want a seat at the end of the world, they'll take it or drown in it." But she knew it wasn't enough. The walls of King's Landing had once felt invincible. Now they felt like a cage, and she wasn't the only one who sensed it. Far to the west, on the rocky cliffs of Casterly Rock, Jaime Lannister watched the sunset with a sick feeling in his gut. He had ridden quietly after word reached him of Winterfell's fall. He hadn't spoken to Cersei in weeks, not since their last bitter argument when she'd accused him of pitying the Starks. She wasn't entirely wrong. Jaime had seen Robb Stark once, young, proud, stupid, but not cruel. Not like Joffrey, not like Ramsay. And now, with the boy risen again, Jaime felt the old weight of guilt settle like snow on his shoulders. He couldn't outrun it anymore, not with Tyrion gone, not with Cersei rotting from the inside out, not with the realm collapsing beneath their feet. That night, he packed his things, and before dawn, he rode east, not to King's Landing, but north. In Winterfell, Robb stood in the Godswood beside Sansa. Snow clung to her hair, her face pale but calm. The old gods watched in silence as the siblings lit a small fire and burned the last of the flayed man banners. "Do you think Father would be proud?" Sansa asked quietly. Robb stared into the flames. "He'd tell me I've become something, else not the king he raised. But the one the North needed," she said. He didn't answer. Oberyn entered, his leg still wrapped from the arrow wound. He smirked at the scene, his voice low but cutting. "You've carved yourself a kingdom from bones. But kingdoms need more than rage." Robb turned. "I have the North. You have chaos. And now every vulture in Westeros is going to want a piece of your crown. What you need is more than a throne. You need a reason." Robb eyed him carefully. "And what do you suggest?" "Marriage," Oberyn said plainly. "To Nymeria." Sansa's breath caught. Oberyn continued, "You've tied swords, tie blood. It will bind the South to your cause forever. The Martells are loyal, but loyalty fades. Make it family, and your war becomes something no one can ignore." Robb stared into the trees. Nymeria, the wild flame who challenged him, who tested him, who bled beside him. She was as much fire as he was frost, and yet, when she was near, the war in his chest went quiet. She was not a prize. She was not a strategy. She was real. "I'll speak to her," he finally said. And just as the wind picked up, a raven landed on the stone ledge nearby. Robb took the scroll and read it. "The Queen offers peace, a marriage to Tommen, a pardon for your crimes, a return to the old order." He crumpled the letter and fed it to the flames. "I've buried too many brothers for peace." In King's Landing, Cersei received no answer, only silence. And in that silence, something stirred. A whisper in the dungeons, a name spoken softly in Flea Bottom, a man with a face no one remembered returning to the capital. His name was Varys, and he was smiling. The skies over King's Landing had turned grey. Storms threatened the capital, not with rain but with blood. The air was thick with fear. Cersei stood in the Red Keep, dressed in black, her crown glinting. Like a noose, the silence of the streets was louder than any riot. She had ruled through terror, through gold, through wildfire. But now all those weapons felt brittle in her hands. Because Robb Stark was coming. He had left Winterfell not as a king, but as a storm. Every house that once bent the knee to the Lannisters was now turning coats. The Riverlands had erupted in open rebellion. The Vale sent quiet riders to aid. The Starks, even the Stormlands, shattered and scattered, had begun to shift. And Dorne had committed. Nymeria Sand rode at the head of the Martell fleet, her armor kissed by the southern sun, her eyes set on vengeance. She had not waited for Robb to ask for her hand. She brought her army north before he could. She wore no veil, no crown, only a blade and a promise. Sansa stayed behind, ruling Winterfell with steel in her voice. She was queen in all but name, smart, sharp, and unmoved by tears. Her last message to Robb was simple: end her. So they came. Dornish ships docked at Blackwater Bay under moonlight. The Golden Company, half paid and half terrified, refused to defend the Queen. They'd been promised gold. They hadn't expected a northern tide and southern fire. Within hours, the city gates were open from within, and the bells never rang. Because this wasn't a siege, it was an execution. Robb entered the city through the Lion Gate. At his side, Oberyn Martell limped with a grin, blood already on his spear. Behind them, northern soldiers marched in silence, many of them orphaned. By Frys, maimed by Boltons, scarred by Lannisters. This was their retribution. The people of King's Landing didn't cheer, they didn't resist. They watched, and they remembered. In the Red Keep, Cersei stood alone. Qyburn had fled. The mountain was already dead, burned alive by wildfire. When he tried to hold the gate, Jaime never returned. He had vanished somewhere in the Riverlands, hunting peace like a man chasing shadows. Robb found her in the throne room. She didn't run. She didn't kneel. She stood before the Iron Throne, in her black dress still holding a goblet of wine. "So the boy lives," she said coldly. "You wear the face of your father, but you're no Eddard Stark." Robb stepped forward, sword in hand. "Good. Ned Stark wouldn't have burned your kingdom." She chuckled, sipping. "And you think you're better? You've become exactly what you hated. A butcher, a rebel, a ghost chasing fire." He didn't blink. "I've become what this realm made me. But unlike you, I'll stop when I win." Oberyn entered beside him, bloody but alive. "She deserves to hang," he said. "For Elia, for Rhaenys, for every child she burned." Cersei looked at him. "And yet here you are, taking orders from a Stark." Oberyn smiled. "A Stark who survived your entire family." Robb didn't speak again. He simply turned, and his men stepped forward. Cersei Lannister was dragged from the Red Keep. There was no trial, no speech, no final mercy. They hung her. From the gates of the city she poisoned, and when the people saw her body swinging, no one wept. The lioness was dead. Days passed. The Iron Throne sat empty. Robb Stark refused it. "I did not come to rule the Seven Kingdoms," he said before the gathered lords. "I came to end the war, and I did." Oberyn Martell returned to Dorne, wounded but satisfied. Nymeria stayed, not as queen, but as Robb's equal, his match. Together they left King's Landing not in triumph, but in silence. Sansa ruled the North. Robb took no throne, only a horse and a road. A few soldiers followed. He visited the Riverlands, the Vale, the Wall. He repaired what was broken, then vanished from the spotlight. The realm began to heal, slowly but truly, and years later, when people told stories to children by firelight, they never spoke of Robb as a king. They called him the Ghost of the North, the boy who died at a wedding, the man who burned a crown, the wolf who howled from Dorne. And when the snow falls heavy and the wind howls through the trees, they say you can still hear him riding, northward, home.